All right, we're here for day 6 of fractions. We're going to continue comparing fractions today. If you're at my school, please grab your computer. Let's get started. Fractions day 6, comparing fractions. So we're going to be using Google Slides today. If you go to my school, you're going to have an assignment in Google Classroom called Fractions Day 6. And if you don't go to my school, you can just follow along with a piece of paper and a pencil. Math task part 1. Miss Painter and Mrs. Maloney each have a piece of licorice. Miss Painter ate 2/4 of her piece of licorice, and Mrs. Maloney ate 2/3 of her piece of licorice. Who ate more? I want you to use the sentence stem, I think Mrs. Maloney, or I think Miss Painter ate more licorice because, and I want you to explain why. So now I'm going to explain what I think. So I think Mrs. Maloney ate more because her licorice is divided into thirds, which means her pieces are bigger. So even though Miss Painter and Mrs. Maloney both ate 2 parts of their licorice, Mrs. Maloney's parts of her licorice are bigger because they're only split up into 3 parts instead of 4. So Mrs. Maloney ate more licorice. Math task part 2. What fraction does Miss Painter have left over? So yesterday or last video, we talked about how the leftover part is the unshaded part, which is the white part in the situation. So we're trying to figure out how much did Miss Painter not eat? How much did Mrs. Maloney not eat? So if we look, there are 2 parts of Miss Painter's licorice that she didn't eat. And there are 4 parts in total, which means she didn't eat 2/4 of her piece of licorice. Now let's look at Mrs. Maloney's. Mrs. Maloney only has 1 piece that she didn't eat, or 1 part that she didn't eat. And there are 3 total parts of her licorice. So she didn't eat 1/3 of her licorice. So who has more left over? Which parts are bigger? Mrs. Maloney's 1 part or Miss Painter's 2 parts? Which white part is bigger? Miss Painter has more left over. So because we found out that she ate less, that means she'd have more left over. So let's review. Last time we talked about this word called compare. And when we compare, it's to see how 2 or more fractions are the same or different. So when we're looking at these fractions, they're divided into a different number of parts. 1 is broken up into 4 parts, and 1 is broken up into 3 parts. So when we look, they have different sized parts. So we talked about this last time. When we compare fractions, we're trying to figure out which fraction is larger or smaller. And we use the words greater than, less than, and equal to. In this situation, we have 1/3 and 1/2. If we look at the pictures, 1/2 is bigger. And you're probably thinking, there's a 2 on the bottom. And this one is a 3. How are those ones bigger? We're going to talk about that soon. All right, so we're going to compare. What do you notice about these fraction models? And I want you to think to yourself, I noticed that the 1/2 part is bigger. So these could be things that you notice. The 1/3 part is smaller. There are 3 parts in the whole with the thirds, and there are 2 parts in the whole with halves. Both wholes have 1 part colored in. So what do we notice about the fractions at the bottom? What do we notice? What makes them the same? What makes them different? The denominator for 1/2 is smaller, but the pieces are bigger than the 1/3 pieces. Why is that? We're going to talk about that. So we're going to be comparing 1/3 and 1/2 still. So even though the numerators or the top numbers are both 1, they're not the same size. So you're probably like, the size of the pieces or the denominators are different. That's why 1/2 has a 2 on the bottom and 1/3 has a 3 on the bottom. So halves are larger than thirds. Wouldn't you rather split a pizza with 2 friends instead of 3 friends? You'd have more pizza because you're sharing it with less people. So the important thing about comparing fraction models is the smaller the denominator, so smaller the number on the bottom of the fraction is, the bigger the parts of the fractions are. So let's compare some fractions. So we're going to be comparing 1/7 and 1/3. So I want you to think for a second. I think 1/7 is greater than, less than, or equal to 1/3 because. So I think 1/7 is less than 1/3. When I look at the picture, the purple part is smaller than the pink part. So 7ths, if you divide something into 7 parts, each part's gonna be a lot smaller than if we only broke something up into 3 parts. Let's compare 1/5 and 1/6. So if we have a string and we break it up into 5 parts, and we have a different string and we break it up into 6 parts, the parts are going to be bigger if we cut it less times, right? So I think 1/5 is greater than 1/6 because I know that 5ths are bigger than 6ths. Alright, so the important thing about comparing fraction models is the smaller the denominator, the bigger the parts of the fraction are. And we said that before. Halves are bigger than thirds. If we only had to break something into 2 parts, the pieces would be bigger. If we had to break something into 3 equal parts, we'd be sharing it with more people, so the parts would be smaller. So here are some good websites to continue your math learning. If you go to my school, you can do iReady, you can do Extra Math. If you need extra practice, you can do Khan Academy, ABC Yeah, and Prodigy. So please stay tuned for Fractions Day 7. All right, I hope you liked that video. We only have one more week of fractions, so stay tuned. Bye.